Hello! A few months ago I made a couple of videos painting in these little sketch booklets that I had made. And I'll be linking the videos at the end of this one so you can check them out if you wanted to see how I painted them all. But I had a lot of requests asking me how to make these little booklets. You can see here I've got a little pocket with a fifth painting. And today I thought I'd show you how to make these books along with a few improvements, especially to the pockets that I had in here. They're quite easy to make. They do require a few materials, but I'll show you all of those as well, and I'm also going to make a really low budget version of the booklet too. So let's get into it, shall we? First up, let's get into some of the materials that I used to make these books. A few years ago, I bought myself a bookbinding kit which came with all of these bits and pieces, wax, string and all, which I'm showing here, and some large needles. Now, if you don't have a bookbinding kit, you can of course improvise by having any kind of pokey tool here. You just need something to stab through all of the papers. Bookbinding kits aren't too expensive. I bought mine off eBay and there's also heaps of them on Amazon. I just had a look. I'll link something below so you can check it out. Now this wax-coated bookbinding string is really good, but of course you could use any kind of string, baker's twine, yarn, just something that's nice and sturdy and isn't going to snap. This kit came with 3 different colours of bookbinding strings, a pale, a tan and a dark brown. And then there are the needles. These are really large ones, much larger than regular sewing needles. I think you can use leather needles as well. So if you have one that's got a nice big eye and a nice stabby point, that will work perfectly. But if you think you're going to make a lot of booklets over time, I do recommend investing in a little bookbinding kit. It just makes life a lot easier. And another item that came in the kit is what they call a bone folder. So this is a super useful tool. Even if you just bought this on its own, it's really handy to have just for folding paper and really giving a nice crease. It's made out of plastic, not bone, but I assume they used to be made out of bone. Along with the bookbinding tools, we're going to need some glue. Any glue will do. I have a glue stick here and this fancier bottle of art glitter glue, which I think is just a slightly stronger version of PVA glue, but it has a needle tip and it is so good for applying a fine line. It comes with a pin as well, so you can keep it in there and stop it from getting clogged. Works really well, actually. Art glitter glue comes from the United States and it's not exactly cheap, but I do a lot of paper crafts so it was worth it for me to buy it, and I really love this glue. It works so well for sticking paper. But honestly, any glue that you have will be fine. Cheap PVA, school glue, any of those things will work well, just as long as it sticks to paper. And of course we need some scissors, because I am going to be cutting up quite a lot of paper. The other option is a paper trimmer like this, which will give a much straighter line, but it's also harder to use on camera, so I'm just going to stay with the scissors today. And of course we need some paper. So I've made my covers out of scrapbooking paper. It is a cardstock, so it's quite thick. And I do recommend using card for the outer cover because it's just nice and sturdy. The scrapbooking paper I used is 12 by 12 inches, which I cut in half to make 2 booklets in a square-shaped format. So I'm going to use more 12 by 12 paper today, scrapbooking paper, which is a nice thick cardstock. Scrapbooking paper can be found in craft shops. 12 by 12 is a pretty standard size. You of course can get other sizes too. What I wanted here was to have my image on the right hand side so it becomes the front cover of the book. That will make more sense once I start folding them up. Of course scrapbooking paper can get expensive, so I'm going to make one entirely out of free stuff, and I've got this old box of cornflakes here, which is a relatively thick card, and this is going to work perfectly well for a book. I can measure it out the same size as the other booklets I'm going to make. I'm also going to cover it with this free magazine that I got from a supermarket, and I'll cut out pictures to stick on top of the box. We'll get to that soon, but first let's make one out of the more expensive scrapbooking paper. You can buy single sheets of it, so it does make it a bit cheaper doing that. And this one is 12 by 12, which is roughly 30 centimeters, just a bit over. So to make 2 equal sized booklets, you'd want to cut it in half at 6 inches, but I really want to get that whole fairy on, so I'm actually going just a little bit higher on this particular booklet. And the leftover piece will be less than 6 inches, but that doesn't really matter to me. I'm actually only using half of the scrapbooking paper because I just want the bits with the image, and I'll use the leftover scrapbook paper for other projects. If you have a pattern that covers the entire piece of paper, then you don't have to worry. But I thought I would use papers that had a specific focal image. I marked out about 6.5 inches. Oh, I'm trying to remember my imperial measurements here. I work in metric, so this is very hard for me. But I'm just going to cut my very fine pencil line that I've drawn. And this is where you'd probably want to use a paper trimmer to make sure it's super straight, but I'm pretty good with scissors as I've had a lot of practice cutting paper. Just go nice and slow and follow your line. I love the action of snipping paper with scissors too. I find it very relaxing. So the left piece of paper will be scrapped for other projects, and I'm just going to trim off the bottom of this bit of paper because I really don't need all of that stuff there. And then I'll be left with the piece of paper that I'm going to use to make my first booklet. You could use plain or colourful card as well, and then paint a picture on the cover. I'm much too lazy for that. I'm just going to use a pre-made picture here. So now I have my piece of paper. I'm just going to fold it in half, trying my best to line it up as evenly as possible. Because the long way is 12 inches, when I fold it over it will become 6 inches, therefore making somewhat of a square, and I'm using that bone folder just to get that really nice crease in the paper. And here we have the cover of the booklet with the picture on the front side. Now if you use double-sided scrapbooking paper you'll get a pattern on the inside, but this is only single-sided, so the inside is plain white, and of course you could decorate that. Now I'm using it as a template to rule out some paper to put inside the book. And I'm using watercolour paper. This is a sheet of Fabriano hot press paper, 300 GSM cotton. You of course can put any paper you would like in the book. Drawing paper, any kind of watercolour paper, use it from a pad or a large sheet like I have here. Another useful item to have is a cotton glove, or any kind of glove really, just to hold the paper and not get fingerprints all over it. Or even a bit of scrap paper folded around so that you hold that instead of the nice paper that you're going to put inside the book. I'm just very carefully cutting this out. It's going to be a bit wobbly with the scissors, but I'm not too worried about that. It is after all meant to be a handmade booklet, and these little imperfections give it character. Now, of course, you might want to make many pages in your booklet, but for the sake of just keeping these really simple, I'm only going to cut out one piece and fold it so that when it goes inside, there will be 4 sides of paper in the booklet. I'm just trimming off the edge there to make it as straight as I possibly can. These booklets do take a little bit of time to put together, but once you start making them, they become easier once you get the hang of it. We haven't got to the sewing part yet. Now I'm just using a kneaded eraser to take off all of my pencil marks, just because I don't like to see those when I'm looking at my booklet. And now I'm folding my paper in half like I did with the cover. Of course I forgot to put the glove back on, but you can see me holding it against the paper so I'm not getting my fingers all over it. Could have done with the second glove there. Never mind. Just using that paper folder to get my nice pressed crease in there, and it's all ready to go inside of the cover. I'll just grab that and put this piece of paper inside, and you can see the paper doesn't quite match up, but that's okay, I'm not too worried about that. And like I said, you could of course fold more pieces together inside each other to make a signature, but I'm just going to do this one piece here. And now for the dreaded sewing part. I've put down a craft mat here because it's good to have something underneath, because I am going to poke the awl through the paper. A piece of thick card or a chopping board would work just as well. I am clipping my book open because it's just a lot easier to show you how I'm going to sew this, and also to stop the pages moving around. Now, of course, you might want to actually measure this, but I'm just doing this by sight. It doesn't really matter. I'm only going to poke 2 holes into this booklet because it's not that big. So the first one's going in. It's really satisfying stabbing that all through the paper, I have to say. Just take extra care not to poke it through your hand underneath, because that would be really painful. And I'm poking a second hole about the same distance from the bottom of the page as I did with the top of the page. And a lot of bookbinding techniques require 3 holes, but I'm just going to do a super basic one here with 2 holes. I've threaded some of this waxy twine into my needle, and I'm measuring out a generous amount of it. I really did just guess this, but I did grab my ruler out. I think it's about 40 centimeters or so. You want maybe 2 to 3 times the amount of string as the length of the book here. And now I'm just poking it in from the outside of the spine into the bottom hole, going through all of the paper, dragging it through, and bringing the needle through the other hole to the outside of the booklet again, making sure I have lots of thread because I am going to need it. And I'm going to repeat this, poking the needle through the hole again, trying very hard not to split the thread inside as I do that, and I'm just going to pull everything taut, then come out through the top hole, and that's pretty much it for the sewing. Now I want to cut a generous piece of thread off. I did actually cut more than I needed, and I'm basically going to tie a knot on the outside of the booklet. I want to keep the string as taut as possible, and this was the most difficult part of the entire process. Having a third hand would be really helpful, so get someone to hold their finger down on the half knot so you can tie the rest of it off and keep it nice and tight. You can see mine went a bit loose. It took me a few goes to get this right. I also recommend dabbing a blob of glue onto the knot so that it won't come undone, because I found that the wax string does tend to do that. Once I tightened it up, I'm just going to trim off the excess bits of string because I don't really like them, but I've seen people put dangly bits on them, so you could leave them long. I just cut mine short for the purposes of this video, and now I can take all of the clips off. And here, my friends, is the most basic sketch booklet you could ever make. I am going to add pockets and things to them, but you could leave it just like this and it will be perfectly fine as a little sketchbook. So now let's make one out of that cornflakes box, and not counting my tools, this one pretty much cost me nothing to make. I flattened the box out and I'm just going to take the front part of it here. I'm using my other booklet as a template so I don't have to measure everything out again. And I'm just rolling a light line with a pencil around the whole thing so I can cut it out and have a booklet about the same size. I mean, they don't all have to be perfectly the same. You could make them any size you like. They could also be landscape or portrait. But I find the square ones are quite fun to make. I'm cutting out along my ruled lines, and I was actually thinking of using the cornflakes box without anything on top of it, but it wasn't going to fold so that I would have the cornflakes logo on the front, so I'm just going to use the box as a base and glue some of the magazine on top. I really love using old pieces of cardboard that would otherwise be chucked out into the recycling bin. If you look around your home or studio, I'm sure you'll find some bits of cardboard to make a booklet out of. Cereal boxes are great. As I mentioned, it really doesn't have to be an expensive project. You don't have to use beautiful cardstock. And I could use the back of the box to make another booklet, but I'm just going to fold this one up and make it exactly the same as I did with the first one, lining it up so it's relatively straight, and then folding it down using the bone folder to crease it nicely so it doesn't spring up again. The cornflakes box was making me think about food, so I thought this food magazine from the supermarket would be perfect to have a theme here, and I just went through and found a few pages that I thought might be nice. The photography in these magazines is actually really good, so if you've got any old magazines lying around, have a look through and see if there's any good pictures that would work as a cover. I'm using glue stick here because that magazine paper is really thin and the PVA glue is going to show underneath, whereas glue stick won't. So I covered the surface of the cornflakes box as thoroughly as possible, and I'm gently laying the magazine picture on top, hoping that I've got most of the picture on the front cover there. The bone folder works well to flatten the paper out and make sure it is thoroughly stuck down. I love it when things have multiple uses. So once it's stuck down, I'm just going to trim around the edges. This is the easiest way to do it rather than measuring that piece of paper out first. Just cut around it once it's glued on. And the edges might be a little bit rough. I mean, you could fold those over onto the inside of the book, but I wanted to keep this as simple as possible without making things too complicated. Trimming the paper off is perfectly fine. And once I've done that, that's my cover. It looks pretty great. I'm actually really happy with how that turned out. I'm going to do the back as well, and I chose this piece of paper to put there. So pretty much doing exactly the same thing, getting the old glue stick out and just covering as much of the card as I can, going into the corners as well because you want all of the edges of the paper to stick down. You can either stick the magazine down onto the booklet or put the booklet down onto the magazine. I was just guessing where the picture was once again and using my bone folder just to make sure there are no air bubbles or anything like that left in there, and snipping it all out with the scissors once more. I actually got this idea as I was looking for scrapbooking paper to make the booklets with, and I thought, I wonder if I can make one just with free stuff, so basically things that are around the house and not have to go out and buy any specific scrapbooking paper to make the covers. I think this actually ended up being my favourite booklet in the whole video. This was so much fun to put together, and I like the back cover too. So I'm using the watercolour paper once more, but I was thinking afterwards maybe I should have just used some really cheap paper for this one. But of course I thought of that later, didn't I? Anyway, you could use paper bag, any kind of crafty paper, printer paper even. It doesn't have to be anything super special, but since I'm cutting up this large sheet of watercolour paper, I may as well use it all. I decided to go for some dark brown string for this one, and I'm going to do exactly the same method as I did before, poking 2 holes in the booklet with my awl, not measuring, just guessing, because it really doesn't matter when there's only 2 holes. You just want them spaced enough apart that the string is going to hold it together nicely and it's not going to move around. And I'm poking through from the outside of the book to begin with because I want my knot to be on the outside. If you want it on the inside, then you'd start from the inside and just do the opposite to what I'm doing here. It really doesn't matter. I just prefer to have the knot on the outside for this tiny booklet. But if I had more pieces of paper folded together to make a larger signature, I might want to have the knot on the inside. It's just a matter of preference, really. And then the fun part of trying to tie that knot and keep the thread taut at the same time. So difficult, but I got there eventually. And once I was happy with the knot, I just trimmed off the excess string with my scissors and made sure to put a blob of glue onto that knot, which I did off camera later. But here's how this little booklet has turned out so far, and I think it's really neat. I love the idea of using cardboard boxes and old magazines to make a cover. But now I'm going to make some pockets to put on the inside. And here's another freebie. I picked this up somewhere. It's someone's business card or something, but I really love the top part with the lion and some of the words. So I thought I would use this as one of my pockets in a book. And this is where I want to make some improvements on my previous books, because I had originally made deep pockets all the way to the top, and it makes it really hard to pull these pieces of paper out. So I thought that making a pocket that goes only halfway up would be a lot easier. And I also want to put pockets on both inside covers of the booklet, rather than just one side. So you can see I've cut a notch out here, and to do this is another tool. This is a 1-inch hole punch. And honestly, you don't need to have one of these or cut a notch out, but I just think it's quite fun, and a lot of people do that. It just kind of indicates that it is actually a pocket. I've got this massive one that I found second hand. I paid $5 for it, and I actually much prefer this one. It cuts a huge circle, but using just part of it will cut a nice wide notch out of the top of the paper. I'll show you this soon, but you've got to see the state of my desk at this point. I just had paper and stuff everywhere. What a mess. I had to tidy up a bit because I just couldn't find anything. So I make pockets for the fairy booklet. You could see the string had come undone, which is why I say to glue it. I had this very girly paper in my stash, and I thought this would be perfect as pockets. I really like this rainbow heart design, so I'm just going to tear out a sheet of this. The paper pad is 6x6, so it pretty much fits in here almost perfectly, and I'm just going to use some of it to make my pocket. I remembered to flip it over this time so that my pencil marks will be hidden on the back. For the purposes of the video, I'm actually measuring this. I figured I'd just rule a line halfway on the paper and then I'll get 2 pockets out of it. I think that's half at least, or it's close enough. It doesn't matter too much as far as I'm concerned. But then I've just ruled a line, and I'm just going to cut down that with scissors as straight as possible once again. Probably a little wobbly, but no worries there. I'm really not that much of a perfectionist. So now I've got the piece of paper for my pocket, and I'm just going to slot it in a little way so I can cut a little bit of a notch out with this giant paper cutter. That looks so good. I really love that one. If I can find something like it, I'll link it in the description below. Now here's where a fine glue applicator comes in handy. This is the Art Glitter Glue. I am going around the very edges of the paper with the glue because I want to stick it down, but I also don't want to put the glue on the top side where I have my thumb because that's where the pocket is going to be, so you can slide in other pieces of paper. You can buy empty needle nose bottles on Amazon as well and just fill it up with any kind of glue you like. That's a cheaper option too. Gently sticking down the paper, but not pulling it taut because I do want other pieces of paper to fit in there. So I'm just having a little bit of give in there, and I'm just wiping it off with a tissue to make sure there's no excess glue which will stick the whole book together. And there we go, we've got a little pocket. I'm going to make another one on the back because why not have two pockets? But first I need to do this knot up again. That was so annoying. After I'd let the glue dry on the knot, this is where I'm making the second pocket, exactly the same way with that other piece of paper, just cutting in a notch. And if you don't have a notch cutter, just use scissors or just leave it as it is, it doesn't really matter. And making sure I put the glue only on 3 sides and not on the top part here. You could also put some glue in a bowl and then use a little paintbrush to paint it on the edges. Don't go out and buy tons of equipment, just make do with what you have in the studio. And once again, I'm gently sticking it down, leaving a little bit of give in the middle of the paper there. And those are my 2 pockets. So as I mentioned, I also really want to turn this piece of card into a pocket, and I'm just going to take off the part that I don't want, leaving the rest of it. I really love the brave, unstoppable and creative part, so I thought that would be perfect to put in another one of the booklets which I made off camera, and that has a purple book design on the front cover. This piece of card was still too wide, so I'm going to have to cut off part of the lion, annoyingly, but I managed to keep most of it in there. And I think this turned out really well as a pocket, so I do tend to keep people's business cards and art cards for this very purpose because they always come in handy. And look, there we go, a free pocket. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing with this one, cut a notch out of it. I think I want it on the front inside of the cover rather than the back. And I think this pocket might be a bit taller than my first book, but it really doesn't matter what size the pocket is. Don't make it too narrow though, otherwise it won't hold paper very well. A pocket roughly halfway up is perfect. This gives enough space at the top to be able to grab paper out more easily when compared with my original booklets. You could also stick some pretty paper down on the inside cover and then put the pocket over the top of that so that you don't have the white space at the top, but I just thought I would leave mine quite plain this time because it's just easier to show that on camera. And I've got that little bit of leftover cardboard. I thought I would use the rest of this as a smaller pocket in my book, but of course it's a bit boring, so I'm going to cover it with some of this magazine paper. The magazine paper on itself is far too thin to have as a pocket, it will just rip, so it needs to be glued on the top of some cardboard. And I'm using the glue stick again because of that flimsy paper. I like to use up as many scraps as possible, and I do have quite a large bin of scrap paper and cardboard in my stash. You never know when it's going to come in handy. So I've stuck that piece of cardboard down and I'll just trim it out so I can make another little pocket. And I just savaged the paper around to make it easier to cut. Now I'll go in a little bit more precise here. So I'd love to know in the comments if you intend on making a booklet after seeing my video, and let me know if you made yours differently because I'm always interested to hear different ways to make books. And there are of course plenty of videos on YouTube on how to make booklets in different forms, from super easy ones like this to more complicated ones. So this little pocket is a bit shorter than halfway, but it will still hold some paper. I had to notch it out as well just because I have to notch everything out. And I'll glue it onto the inside cover. I didn't bother putting paper on this side of the cardboard because it won't be seen, it will be glued down to the inside cover. Quickly get that glue on there and then gently lay it down. What I like about the art glitter glue is once those 2 pieces of paper are together, it dries really quickly and forms a very strong bond, so it won't pull apart very easily. I'm using a bit more of the cornflakes box to make a pocket for the back cover, and I decided to use some corn as my picture there. Doing exactly the same thing, quick bit of glue stick down, putting it onto the magazine and cutting it out. And here's how this pocket's looking. I like that little bit of corn there. I find because I haven't got a lot of paper in these booklets that I can kind of make themes out of them, so I'll probably do all food paintings in this particular booklet just to match with the cover. But that's something I'll do down the line. Today I'm just making the booklets. I'll glue that one down like I did with the others, and we have another little pocket ready to go. So super easy to make once you get the hang of it, and you can put heaps of these books together. So now what to put in the pockets? Well, after cutting out all of my booklets, I have quite a lot of pieces of scrap paper here, so I thought I would cut these up to have some smaller pieces to paint on. I also have these watercolour postcards, and these actually fit really well into the size of booklet that I've made, so that works out nicely. I'll show you, I'll put one in here. You can see the postcard is just the right size. I'm really happy with that. So now I'll show you all of the books that I made today and some of the pieces of paper that I put inside the pockets. They can be all sorts of different sizes, it doesn't have to be all the same size. And you could use the pockets to store anything in: business cards, pictures you might have cut out from other pieces of paper, postcards. If you're travelling with these little booklets, you could have all sorts of things that you collect on your travels to put inside the pockets. You could add any kind of paper, have more signatures so you've got lots of paper to use. The possibilities are endless with these little booklets, but this is just the most basic one I could think of. Here are the two that I made off camera, adding in some pockets with some scrapbooking paper that I had. And then I have just other offcuts. And these postcards I got from a pen show, so I thought I'd stick those in there just to show you how you can use the pockets in the book. I really hope I've explained how to make these books so that you can understand. I'd really appreciate your feedback in the comments. And this is my favourite pocket. I also turned an offcut piece into another tiny booklet, so it's a book within a book. It's such a great way to use up scrap paper. You could also put in another piece that's about the same size as the pages of the book, which is what I did in my first booklets. But we don't have to be stuck to one size of paper, and smaller pieces of paper do go in more easily. So here are all 4 booklets. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. This one turned out to be my favourite of the day. It was so much fun making it out of scrap stuff. Now I'll have to do some paintings, but that's going to be for a future video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up, and you might want to click the subscribe button for more videos. Here are the paintings I did in the original booklets, the first video and the second one. I hope you like watching those too. I'll see you all again really soon in my next video. Have a great day out there, and I'll swatch you later. Bye!